Before we step into the ancient streets of Pompeii, before the mountain begins to speak, I invite you to get comfortable. Find a position that feels soft and restful. Let your body sink into the bed. Take a slow, deep breath in and gently exhale. Another breath in and out. With each breath, you are stepping away from the worries of today and stepping into a story that will carry you across centuries into a time of bustling markets, marble temples, glowing oil lamps, and a distant mountain that watched silently over it all. This is not just history, it is a dreamscape, a journey where past and present blur, where imagination and memory intertwine. You are safe, you are warm, you are ready, and now let us begin.
The sun rose gently over the Bay of Naples, spilling light across the calm waters, where small fishing boats rocked lazily in the tide. The city of Pompeii awoke slowly, like a living creature stretching its limbs after slumber. From the marble steps of temples to the narrow, cobbled alleys, the morning began with sound, with scent, with color. Imagine, if you will, walking those streets in the year 79 CE. You are not a tourist from the future. You are there, a soul among tens of thousands, breathing in the salt air, hearing the chatter of merchants, feeling the warmth of stone beneath your sandals. Above you, always present, loomed the great mountain, Vesuvius. To most, it was not a threat, but a guardian. Its slopes were green with vineyards, its base fertile with crops. Few remembered it as dangerous. Fewer still had words for what it truly was. To them, it was simply the mountain, steady and eternal. But for now, we are far from danger. The morning is alive, vibrant. The bakeries stir first. Long before the streets fill, the millstones grind grain into flour. Huge circular stones, turned by donkeys, creak and groan. Workers hum songs, dust swirling in the morning shafts of light. The air thickens with the smell of baking bread, hundreds of loaves rising within clay ovens, each marked with the seal of its maker. Bread is not merely food, it is currency, divided carefully, baked in great rounds, enough to feed soldiers, families, slaves, and senators alike. Beyond the bakeries, the forum begins to awaken. This is the heart of Pompeii. The great open square, lined with columns and surrounded by temples and markets. Here, men in white togas gather to talk of trade, of politics, of distant Rome. Women, draped in flowing stolas, guide children by the hand, stopping to buy figs, olives, honey.
The clink of coins rings out, the voices of merchants rise and fall like music. Fresh fish from the bay, fine wool from the north, wine, sweet and strong. The stalls are alive with color, red pomegranates stacked in baskets, copper pots gleaming in sunlight, bolts of dyed cloth fluttering in the breeze. A little further on, in the amphitheater, young men practice with wooden swords. Their laughter echoes against the stone. They dream of one day stepping into the arena, of hearing the roar of the crowd, of glory that might outlast death. Nearby, artists paint murals upon plaster walls, gods and heroes brought to life in vivid blues and reds, scenes of myths that whisper from the past. And everywhere, water flows. Pompeii is a city of fountains and baths. From aqueducts miles away, fresh water streams into the heart of the city, pouring into carved basins where children splash and women fill clay jars. In the great bathhouses, steam curls in the air, marble floors gleam, and soft voices murmur as bodies slip into warm pools. Above it all, Vesuvius watches in silence. You walk the streets and see graffiti etched into walls, Playful notes, declarations of love, political slogans, even jokes scratched by hands long gone. The city speaks not only in its grandeur, but in its small human voices. Marcus loves Julia. Vote for Lucius. The drinks here are the best in town. Life is everywhere. Farmers bring in carts piled with garlic, onions, and grain. Fishermen unload nets shimmering with silver scales. Children chase one another between stalls. Dogs curl lazily in the sun, tails twitching. At the edge of the city, villas spread wide, homes of the wealthy, with mosaics of dolphins and gods, with gardens perfumed by roses and laurel. Slaves move quietly, tending fires, pouring wine, trimming hedges. The air is warm now, late morning. The smell of bread, of incense, of olive oil, of sea breeze mingles in your nose. The streets are alive with footsteps, wheels on stone, hooves striking rhythm. The city hums like a song.
And yet, if you pause, if you lift your gaze, you might notice something subtle. A faint tremor in the earth, so small you wonder if it was your imagination. A curl of smoke from the mountain, blending with the clouds. Few notice, fewer care. The city is alive, and life does not easily make room for warning. For now, the day belongs to Pompeii, to its laughter, its market stalls, its painted walls, its fountains sparkling in sunlight. The world feels eternal. The mountain seems eternal. Everything seems eternal. But history is already shifting. The morning fades into afternoon, and with it, a shadow begins to stretch. The morning sunlight lingers longer now, spreading across rooftops of terracotta tiles, washing over whitewashed walls, and glinting off polished bronze door knockers. Pompeii was a city designed to shine in daylight. Every street, every courtyard, every painted fresco seemed to come alive when kissed by the rising sun. Walk slowly with me, step by step, down a narrow street where stepping stones rise from the cobbles to let citizens cross without dirtying their sandals. See the cart ruts worn deep into the stone from years of wheels passing over the same paths. The air carries faint traces of donkey bray, mixed with human laughter. A group of children dash past, hair uncombed, faces lit with energy. One clutches a wooden hoop, rolling it noisily along the street. Another carries a small clay doll. Their voices echo between walls painted with bright murals. Apollo guiding the sun, Venus rising from the sea. These walls are not only decoration, but memory. Each brushstroke, an offering to gods and stories that still breathed through the people of Pompeii. Not far away, the baker lifts a fresh round loaf from his oven. The crust crackles as it cools. He marks it with a sharp line, so it can be divided equally into 8 pieces. Bread was ration. Bread was livelihood. Bread was symbol. A boy runs to deliver a basket of these loaves to the forum, where vendors will sell them to the first hungry buyers.
Step further into the forum now. The square is immense, flanked by the grand temple of Jupiter at one end, standing high upon its podium, columns towering against the blue sky. Here the citizens gather not only to buy and sell, but to argue, to gossip,
to plan. A lawyer in a bright toga raises his voice, reading aloud a petition for land. A merchant from Syria displays bolts of silk dyed in exotic purples and blues, colors so rare that only the wealthiest can afford them. A woman, dignified in flowing stola and veil, selects olives with careful fingers, bargaining in quick Latin. Everywhere you look, there is motion, there is life. Statues gleam with offerings of flowers. Incense curls lazily from a shrine to the lairs, household gods who protect the city. Coins clink against stone counters. The chatter of the crowd rises like the sea. Turn your head, and the scent shifts. Strong fish from the nearby market, mixed with honey cakes sold by a smiling vendor. He sprinkles sesame seeds across golden crusts, offering samples to children who giggle with mouths full. Further still, in the amphitheater, echoes of practice ring out. Wooden swords clack, shields thud against each other. Young men sweat under the weight of practice armor, dreaming of the day when their names will be shouted by thousands. The amphitheater is vast, capable of holding over 20,000 people. Even now empty, it hums with potential, as though it remembers the roar of crowds from the days before. And yet, not all is grandeur. If you leave the Forum and wander into the side streets, you will find taverns where sailors drink strong wine even before midday. Their laughter is coarse, their songs filled with sea and storm. Graffiti on the walls outside tells stories, some crude, some poetic. Atematus was here. Cornelia is the best dancer. The walls of Pompeii spoke as much as its people, keeping the whispers of the city alive for anyone who cared to read.
The houses, too, are filled with detail. Enter one of the great villas, and your eyes adjust to shaded courtyards where fountains trickle gently into pools. Mosaics of dolphins, of masks, of geometric beauty line the floors. Statues of fauns, of satyrs, of gods stand among flowers. Slaves move silently through the halls, carrying trays of figs, pouring cups of wine, adjusting curtains to soften the sun. In one corner, an old man reads from a wax tablet, lips moving silently with calculation. In another, a young girl plucks the strings of a lyre, her melody soft and halting, still learning the song. This is Pompeii, not only a place of markets and arenas, but of quiet, domestic beauty, of everyday lives lived beneath the watch of the mountain. And oh, the mountain. Vesuvius rises beyond it all, green with vineyards, dotted with farms that cling to its slopes. To the people of Pompeii, it is a blessing. Its soil rich, its air sweet with growth. Wine flows from these hills, famed across the empire. It is a giver, not a destroyer in their eyes. And so when a faint rumble passes through the ground, when a thin ribbon of smoke rises against the sky, most pay it no mind. Mountains breathe, after all. The earth shifts. What is one tremor against the eternity of stone? But you, listening now, you know what lies ahead. And perhaps that gives the day a strange weight, a strange stillness beneath the sound of voices, beneath the smell of bread and wine. History moves quietly, even when the city feels eternal. For now, Pompeii is alive, its streets filled with footsteps, its walls filled with color, its fountains filled with water that never ceases to flow. For now the sun climbs higher, and the city does not yet know how short its eternity will be.
The day had begun like any other. Warm sunlight spilling across Pompeii, shadows stretching across courtyards, the sea beyond glimmering like a sheet of hammered bronze. Markets were full, Fountains burbled with steady rhythm, and children's laughter carried down the narrow streets. But then, a shift. It began softly, almost too softly to notice. A strange stillness, a silence that pressed against the city as if the world itself were holding its breath. Dogs barked uneasily, birds wheeled in odd patterns, flocking suddenly to the edges of the fields as though called by some invisible hand. And then came the sound, a low thunder that did not belong to the sky. Not a storm rolling in from the sea, not the clash of waves against the shore, but something deeper, more ancient, a roar from the earth itself. It rolled beneath their feet, humming through stone streets, vibrating amphorae in kitchens, rattling bronze fittings on doors. The people of Pompeii froze, their voices caught, their hearts tightening. They had felt tremors before. Vesuvius was alive, yes, but alive in the way of a sleeping beast that occasionally shifted in its dreams. A rumble here, a tremble there, and life always went on. Why should today be any different? And yet, today was different. From the summit of the mountain rose a column, not smoke like from a hearth, not the gentle white mist of morning clouds, but something vast, dark, and furious. A pillar of ash, black and gray, mixed with streaks of fire, twisting upward as if the mountain had torn open the gates of the underworld itself. At first, many stared, in awe. Some pointed, children laughing nervously at the strange shape. To them, it looked like a tree, a pine tree of smoke, stretching high into the heavens. Its trunk thick and unyielding, its crown spreading wide, blotting out the blue of the afternoon sky. But soon, awe turned to fear.
The sunlight dimmed, as though dusk had come too soon. Shadows lengthened, grew sharper. A fine dust began to fall. Light as snow, gray as ash. It gathered on shoulders, in hair, in the folds of tunics. Some brushed it off with irritation. Others lifted palms to catch it, puzzled, uncertain. Then came the stones. Small at first, little pebbles that clattered against rooftops, bounced across cobblestones, tapped against wooden shutters. Harmless, some thought, a curiosity. But the stones grew larger, heavier, raining down with relentless force. Roof tiles cracked, glass shattered. People covered their heads with cloth, with baskets, with shields, anything at hand. The city of Pompeii began to tremble, not only from the earth, but from the sky itself. Imagine standing there now, in the Forum, looking up as the heavens turned black. The once familiar sun, the familiar blue, gone. Instead, a night descended that was not night, a storm that was not storm. The mountain did not rage with wind or rain, but with fire, ash, and fury. Panic spread. Citizens rushed into streets, clutching children, shouting names. Some ran toward the gates of the city, desperate to flee. Others turned back to their homes, believing stone walls could protect them. Priests hurried to temples, lifting their hands to the gods, begging Jupiter, begging Venus, begging Vulcan, the god of fire, to turn his wrath aside. The air thickened. It was harder to breathe. Every inhale filled the lungs with fine dust, coating tongues, drying throats. The ash fell faster now, covering the ground in a thick carpet. Sandals slipped, carts overturned, animals brayed in terror. Somewhere, a roof collapsed with a groaning crack, sending up a plume of dust. Somewhere else, a woman screamed, her voice quickly drowned by the roar of the mountain. Still, the column grew, taller, wider, darker, Flames flickered within it. Flashes of lightning sparked in its depths. The gods were angry, the people whispered. The underworld had broken loose. This was not just disaster. It was omen. It was judgment. It was the end of days.
And yet, in that chaos, life clung stubbornly. A baker still tried to shield his loaves, pulling them from his oven, unwilling to leave behind the bread he had labored for. A merchant rushed to lock his chest of coins, as though gold could save him from fire. Lovers clung to each other in the streets, whispering promises neither would live to keep. Time itself seemed to stretch, every heartbeat a century, every moment a choice, to run, to stay, to pray, to fight. Above it all, Vesuvius roared. As the ash thickened, Pompeii's narrow streets grew unrecognizable. Once bright frescoes on house walls blurred into gray silhouettes. Statues of gods in courtyards became ghosts, their features hidden beneath the soft but relentless snow of death. Some tried to flee. Families poured toward the city gates, clutching bundles of food, jewelry, anything they could grab in haste. But the roads clogged quickly. Wagons overturned, mules brayed, slaves cried out for masters who had vanished in the chaos. At the gates, guards tried to direct the crowd, but their voices were swallowed by the roar of the mountain and the cries of terrified citizens. Outside the walls, fields were already buried knee-deep in ash. Each step became heavier, slower, as though the land itself wanted to hold its people in place. Some stumbled and fell, their sandals torn away, their bodies quickly covered in gray powder until they looked like statues abandoned mid-flight. Others turned back, realizing escape might be impossible. They sought safety in strong buildings, the baths, the amphitheater, the villas of the wealthy. But ash found every crack, every gap. Roofs sagged under its weight. Beams groaned. It was no longer only the mountain to fear, but the city itself collapsing piece by piece. And all the while, Vesuvius thundered. Imagine, if you will, standing in that suffocating darkness. The air is so thick it scrapes the throat, every breath like swallowing sand. Torches barely glow, their flames choked by the ash. The ground trembles, not with the rhythm of life, but with the heartbeat of the earth itself.
Amidst this chaos, there were still moments of humanity. A father shielding his child beneath his cloak. A mother pressing bread into the hands of strangers. A priest covered in ash from head to toe, carrying the statue of Apollo through the streets, believing that if the god could be saved, perhaps the city would be too. Then came the fire. Not flames as from a hearth, not gentle sparks from a torch, but rivers of fire that glowed on the slopes of Vesuvius. Red and orange against the black sky, they flowed like molten rivers, devouring trees, swallowing villas on the mountainside. The heat carried across the air, searing even from a distance, a warning of what was to come. In the harbor, ships rocked violently against their moorings. Sailors scrambled, desperate to cut ropes, to flee across the Bay of Naples. But even the sea betrayed them. Ash fell upon the water, thickening it, making it heavy, sluggish. Waves carried burning fragments of pumice, setting small boats aflame before they could escape. And in Herculaneum, closer to the mountain, the end came even faster. There, the first pyroclastic surge descended. A cloud of fire, ash, and toxic gas, rushing at unimaginable speed, hotter than any forge, deadlier than any weapon. It swept through the streets, snuffing out lives in an instant, leaving behind only silence and bodies frozen in their final gestures. Pompeii, for the moment, had more time. But not enough. Never enough. The rain of ash turned from curiosity to burial. Houses were entombed. Temples disappeared. Streets became trenches. Walls became mounds. People dug with their hands, trying to free doors that would not open, trying to breathe air that would not come. Some clung to loved ones in upper rooms, hoping for rescue that would never arrive. Others crouched in cellars, praying for morning light that would never return. The sky itself seemed to vanish. No stars, no moon, no sun, only the endless storm of fire and dust. And still, the city lived for a little longer. Each breath stolen, each heartbeat borrowed, life clinging against the inevitability of stone and flame.
The hours bled together under the blackened sky. No one could tell if it was day or night anymore. Only the rhythm of fear, the rising weight of ash, the endless growl of the mountain. Inside Pompeii's villas, families huddled together. Wealth meant nothing now. Golden bracelets and silver cups lay forgotten on floors as their owners clutched one another instead. Even the proudest patricians, who once strutted in the forum in purple togas, now sat trembling in silence, their faces smeared gray, indistinguishable from their slaves. The air thickened with poison, sulfur burned the nose, and each breath carried the sting of fire. Some wrapped cloth around their mouths, dipped in wine or water, hoping it would help. Others prayed aloud, their voices rising into the dark heavens, begging Jupiter, pleading with Vesta, whispering to Venus for mercy. But the gods were silent. Then it came. The first pyroclastic surge, born from the heart of the mountain, not a flow of lava, but something worse. A wave of gas, ash, and fragments hotter than any furnace, moving faster than the fastest horse. It did not crawl, it raced. It did not burn slowly, it consumed in an instant. When it struck Herculaneum, it ended lives, before screams could leave the throat. Entire streets froze in silence, people trapped mid-motion, mothers shielding children, men with arms raised, faces twisted not in pain, but surprise. Death came swifter than a heartbeat. Pompeii, though farther away, could not escape. The first surges brushed the city, filling cellars, racing down streets. Roofs collapsed one after another, with a thunder like distant drums. Temples crumbled, their statues toppling head first into the choking ash. By now, those still alive understood escape was no longer possible. Some fled into the fields, only to vanish beneath collapsing roofs of pumice. Some huddled in wine cellars, clutching amphora, as though the clay vessels could shield them from the breath of the gods.
Others gathered in the great amphitheater, seeking strength in numbers, their cries echoing off stone seats that would never hold laughter again. And then came the final surges.
They poured down from the mountain like rivers of night itself, rolling, boiling, screaming as they devoured all before them. Streets filled not with water, but with fire and dust so hot it burned lungs before breath could finish. The city, alive with cries only moments before, fell silent. Suddenly, completely, utterly silent. Not a torch glowed, not a voice rose. Only the storm. Within hours, Pompeii was gone. Buried. Entombed beneath meters of ash and pumice. Sealed so perfectly that even the shapes of beds, tables, and loaves of bread would remain waiting for discovery 2,000 years later. The mountain quieted, its fury spent. A strange peace fell across the land. Birds returned, circling over a city that no longer breathed. Waves lapped gently at the shore, as though nothing had happened. And yet, beneath the stillness, thousands lay frozen in time. A city's heartbeat stopped forever. The world moved on. Rome continued, emperors rose and fell, centuries passed, and Pompeii slept, untouched, forgotten, its final day locked in stone and ash, until the earth itself chose to reveal it again.
For nearly 17 centuries, Pompeii lay hidden. The mountain, calmed after its fury, wore a new crown of stone and silence. Grass grew over its slopes, vineyards spread across its foothills, and shepherds led their flocks across fields that covered a city no one remembered. Where once fountains splashed in marble courtyards and chariots clattered over stone streets, now only roots pressed downward, weaving through the forgotten bones of walls and temples. The people of later centuries did not know that Pompeii was there. They spoke of legends, a city punished by the gods, a place swallowed by the earth, but its name faded, its story reduced to whispers. Farmers dug wells and sometimes struck marble, colored frescoes, fragments of statues, but they thought little of it. The land seemed generous, offering stones for building, mosaics broken into lime for plaster. The past slept, and the world moved on. Rome had fallen, empires rose, kings ruled, nations fought, crusaders marched east, the Renaissance bloomed with art and philosophy, and all the while, Pompeii waited in silence. Its houses stood, sealed. Its bread remained in ovens, turned to stone. Its people, men, women, children, lay frozen where they had fallen. A whole city, like a dream, locked in a vault of ash. It was not until the mid-1700s that curiosity pierced the earth. Near the town of Resina, workmen digging a well struck something hard, something carved. What they uncovered was not stone alone, but the upper vaults of a theater, seats still intact, staircases winding into shadow. They had found Herculaneum, Pompeii's sister, buried by the same eruption. And from there the search spread. Soon after, beneath the fields and orchards, Pompeii herself stirred. In 1748, systematic excavations began under King Charles III of Naples. What emerged was unlike anything Europe had seen. Painted walls, still glowing with red and gold, courtyards filled with fallen columns, amphorae of wine sealed beneath ash, statues staring with lifelike eyes after centuries of darkness.
Imagine the awe of those first explorers. By torchlight, they entered rooms where time had stopped. They touched frescoes of dancing figures that seemed to move again in the flicker of flame. They stepped
over mosaics that glittered with glass and stone, showing Neptune, dolphins, vines heavy with grapes. And they found the bodies, hollow spaces in the hardened ash where human forms had once been. Into those voids they poured plaster, and slowly the shapes returned. A mother crouched over her child, a man shielding his face, a dog curled mid-chain. It was haunting, and yet mesmerizing. Here was not a legend, not a myth, but an entire world preserved. Streets still lined with stepping stones. Taverns with graffiti scrawled on the walls. Election slogans painted in red. Inkwells, loaves of bread, surgical tools. Everything left exactly as it had been, the very moment life was extinguished. Europe was enthralled. Artists, scholars, and travelers came from every corner. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the German poet, walked the streets and confessed, "Many disasters have occurred in the world, but few have given so much delight to posterity." Others wrote of it as though the gods themselves had chosen to preserve Pompeii for the lessons of mankind. As the 18th century became the 19th, Pompeii shaped imaginations everywhere. Painters captured its ruins. Writers used its tragedy in novels. Musicians composed in its memory. It entered the romantic mind as both wonder and warning. A city caught between beauty and destruction, life and death. And still, the excavations continued. Year after year, decade after decade, more of Pompeii awoke. A forum revealed, its temples lined with broken pillars. Villas opened, their atriums echoing once again with the sound of footsteps. Though now those footsteps belonged not to Romans,
but to travelers in modern boots. Even today, more than 2 centuries later, much of the city remains buried, still dreaming beneath the earth. Pompeii had risen again, not in life, but in memory. A city turned museum, a silent storyteller of the ancient world. Now, as night deepens around us, imagine walking those streets yourself. Lantern in hand, you wander past frescoed walls, past bakeries with stone mills, past the baths where steam no longer rises. Above you, the stars glitter over Vesuvius, calm and quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. The voices of the past murmur like the wind through broken arches. You pause, you listen, and in the stillness, you realize Pompeii is no longer lost. It speaks again. When Pompeii awoke from its centuries of silence, what emerged was not only tragedy, but an intimate portrait of how ancient people once lived. Unlike other ruins, broken, half-remembered, faded. Pompeii was whole. It was as if someone had paused time in the middle of an ordinary day and then lifted the curtain centuries later for us to see. The streets stretched out in straight lines, paved with worn stone blocks that still bore the grooves of chariot wheels. Along them were stepping stones, raised just enough for sandaled feet to cross when water flowed through the gutters. Imagine walking there, your sandals tapping softly, the smell of baked bread drifting from a nearby shop. Around you, voices rise in Latin, greetings, haggling, gossip. Dogs bark in courtyards, children chase each other past the fountains. Step into a home, perhaps the House of the Faun, one of the grandest. The entrance opens onto an atrium, a shallow pool in the center where rainwater gathers. Light filters down through the open roof, gleaming off mosaics that sparkle with blues and golds. On the walls, frescoes tell stories of gods and heroes, their colors as bright as if painted yesterday. In the dining room, couches line the walls, ready for banquets where guests recline, eating figs and olives, drinking wine cooled in snow brought down from the mountains. Not every house was a palace. Many were modest, narrow dwellings where shopkeepers lived above their workshops. Bakeries with their massive stone mills stood ready, loaves once placed in ovens still resting there, turned to stone. Taverns with counters of polished marble bore the marks of countless cups set down, wine poured, laughter echoing late into the night. On their walls, graffiti was scrawled, love notes, insults, jokes, names of gladiators cheered like heroes.
The city was alive with spectacle. The amphitheater could seat over 20,000, where crowds gathered to watch gladiators clash, the roar of voices rising like a storm. Theaters hosted plays and poetry readings where actors wore masks and the words of poets rang out under the open sky. In the baths, steam curled into domes painted with stars and dolphins. Here, men and women bathed, gossiped, argued, relaxed, their lives bound together in rhythm as steady as the flowing water. Markets filled the forum each morning. Farmers brought vegetables, fishermen sold their catch, traders laid out jars of oil and wine. Statues of gods watched from their pedestals, silent guardians of the city. And all around, Mount Vesuvius stood, green, fertile, unthreatening, as much a part of daily life as the sun. What is most haunting, perhaps, is how ordinary it all feels. The laughter, the quarrels, the small details, sandals left by the door, coins clutched in a hand, a dog's paw print pressed forever in drying tile. These were people not so different from us. They loved, they worked, they dreamed. They made art, music, food. They painted their walls with gardens and gods. They wrote quick notes on scraps of wax, worried about debt, hoped for fortune. And then, in a single day, it was gone. The rediscovery of Pompeii revealed that ordinary lives are just as eternal as monuments. When you walk through its streets, you hear those echoes, not as distant ghosts, but as neighbors across time. Their voices hum beneath the stone, like a lullaby of history. Now, as you drift deeper into this story, let that hum soften. Picture the streets emptying at dusk, lanterns glowing in doorways, families gathering for their evening meal. The air is warm, cicadas sing, and the mountain looms quietly above. Life in Pompeii slows, the city settling into sleep, unaware of what tomorrow will bring. The morning of August 24th, 79 CE, dawned like any other in Pompeii. The sun rose gently over the Bay of Naples, painting the sky with gold. Merchants opened their stalls in the forum, bakers drew loaves from their ovens, and families prepared for another summer day beneath the shadow of Mount Vesuvius.
The mountain was green, covered in vineyards and farms. To those who lived in its shadow, it was not a threat, but a giver of life. But on this morning, a change stirred deep within the earth. Beneath the quiet slopes, magma pressed upward, gases built, and the mountain trembled with hidden force. The people did not yet understand what was to come. Some noticed the animals restless, the dogs barking, the birds lifting into the sky too soon. Water in wells trembled, as if stirred by an unseen hand. A few felt a faint rumble underfoot, but dismissed it, as life continued in the streets. Then, in the late morning hours, Vesuvius roared. A deafening crack split the sky, and the mountain burst open with a column of smoke and ash that surged upward with unimaginable power. Pliny the Younger, a Roman who watched from across the bay, would later describe it. A cloud shaped like a pine tree, its trunk of smoke rising high, branching at the top into rolling waves. It soared miles into the heavens, darkening the sun. In Pompeii, shadows fell across the city. People looked upward in wonder, fear, confusion. At first, there was no panic. Some thought the gods were showing signs. Others believed it would pass. But soon, ash began to fall. Gently at first, like gray snow. It settled on rooftops, cloaks, hair. The air thickened with a sharp, sulfurous smell. Hours passed, and the rain of ash grew heavier. Roofs groaned under its weight. Lanterns flickered as day dimmed into twilight. Families huddled together, clutching their possessions, debating whether to flee. Some began to leave, making their way toward the gates of the city, carrying children, leading animals, dragging carts. Others stayed, hoping their walls would shield them.
The ground shook with violent tremors. Buildings cracked, columns toppled, statues fell from their pedestals. Fountains dried as underground channels shifted. Fear spread, no longer hidden. By nightfall, fire glowed on the mountain. Molten rock spilled down its sides, rivers of light flowing toward the sea. The sky flashed with lightning, born not of storm clouds, but of ash and fire. It was as though the heavens and earth themselves were at war. And still the ash fell. Hour after hour. Thicker, heavier, choking the air, blinding the eyes. People tied cloth to their faces, stumbling through the dark streets lit only by the glow of the mountain. Cries echoed, children calling for their parents, families calling for the gods. As midnight approached, the first surges of pyroclastic flow thundered down Vesuvius. These were not gentle rains of ash, but avalanches of fire and gas, moving faster than any horse could run. Herculaneum, closer to the mountain, was the first to be overtaken, swallowed in silence, preserved in an instant. In Pompeii, the people still struggled to escape, unaware of how little time remained. The city was a maze of panic. Some tried to flee toward the sea, only to find the waves driven back by tremors, the harbor too shallow for ships to approach. Others lay down in their homes, praying to Jupiter, to Venus, to any god who might hear. Then came the dawn, a dawn without light, for the sun could not pierce the smoke that covered the land. The final surges came in waves, sweeping into the city with crushing force. The air itself turned deadly, hot and heavy, stealing breath in a single instant. Those who remained, in houses, in streets, in gardens, fell where they stood, their final moments captured forever. By the end, Pompeii was gone. Buried beneath more than 15 feet of ash and pumice, it lay silent, frozen in time. And yet, within that silence, something eternal was preserved.
The city of Pompeii was a place of rhythm. The rhythm of markets, of fountains spilling into marble basins, of sandals on cobbled streets, of laughter and of worship. On that fateful day,
Those rhythms faltered, one by one, as ash drifted from the heavens. At first, the falling pumice was light, almost playful, bouncing off rooftops with hollow taps, gathering in courtyards like some strange new dust. Children held out their hands in wonder, as though it were a gift from the sky. But soon, the flakes grew thicker, rougher, harder to breathe through. They scratched the skin, stung the eyes, and whispered an unsettling truth. This was not snow, not rain, not blessing. This was a burial beginning in silence. Within the atriums of wealthy villas, mosaics gleamed faintly beneath drifting dust. The frescoes on the walls, scenes of gods and banquets, blurred as the air thickened. In bakeries, ovens still glowed, though their flames dimmed as ash clogged the chimneys. Loaves of bread were left half-baked, forgotten as owners rushed to gather family and valuables. In taverns, cups of wine were abandoned mid-toast, the chatter replaced by silence, then by prayers. And yet, life did not stop all at once. For some hours, the city tried to continue. Merchants closed their shops, sweeping ash from doorways. Priests hurried to temples, lighting incense, hoping to calm the fury of the gods. Farmers returned from fields on the edge of town, their carts heavy with grapes and olives, only to find the gates choked with people debating whether to stay or flee. The animals sensed more than the people. Horses kicked and whinnied in their stables, desperate to break free. Dogs howled, some fleeing through the streets, others cowering beneath tables. Birds, normally filling Pompeii with sound, vanished altogether, their wings carrying them far from the mountain.
By afternoon, roofs sagged beneath the weight of falling stone. Shingles cracked, beams groaned, and in some places, ceilings collapsed in sudden crashes, startling families into flight. Ash piled waist-high in narrow streets, slowing every step. Sandals slipped on pumice, carts overturned, and the air, the very breath, grew harder to draw. The darkness deepened. The sun vanished behind the column of smoke, and though it was still day, lanterns were lit in homes, in streets, in hands. Shadows flickered, stretching long and uncertain, as though the city had been cast into twilight. Through it all, a sound carried, a low rumble from the mountain, like an endless growl. Sometimes it rose into thunderous cracks. Other times it softened into a deep vibration that seemed to pulse through the very stones of the city. It was the heartbeat of Vesuvius, wild and unrelenting. As evening came, fear took hold more fully. The Forum, once filled with debate and trade, became a gathering of confusion. Families clung to each other, carrying what they could: coins, jewelry, bread, idols of their household gods. Some prayed aloud, their voices rising into the choked sky. Others urged movement toward the gates, toward the sea, toward anywhere that seemed safer than here. But the sea offered no salvation. At the harbor, the waves had retreated, pulled back as though the ocean itself were recoiling. Ships stood stranded on shallow waters, unable to reach the shore. Those who had run to the coast stood helpless, watching as the horizon glowed red with fire and smoke. The smell of sulfur burned their throats, and the air grew heavier with every hour.
Far across the bay, Pliny the Younger watched from Misenum, where he lived with his mother and uncle, the famous admiral Pliny the Elder.
He described the scene with astonishment. A column so vast it seemed to touch the gods, black at its base, white with ash at its crown, branching like an immense pine. He felt awe as well as dread, for the sight was both magnificent and terrifying. His uncle, drawn by duty and curiosity, prepared ships to sail toward Pompeii, not away from it. In the city itself, those who had not fled began to realize escape was slipping away. The gates clogged with ash, the streets nearly impassable. The falling stones pummeled roofs and shoulders, leaving wounds that bled beneath the choking gray. The cries of children echoed louder now, desperate, piercing, yet soon swallowed by the roar of the mountain. The hours passed, heavy and endless. As night fell, lightning crackled within the column of ash, streaks of fire cutting across the black sky. The storm was unnatural, born not of clouds, but of burning rock and boiling gases. To the people of Pompeii, it must have seemed as though Jupiter himself hurled his bolts from the heavens. And still, the ash fell. It fell on gardens where figs and olives once grew, on streets where chariots had raced, on amphitheaters where gladiators had fought, on villas adorned with art and wealth. It covered mosaics of Neptune, Venus, Apollo, gods who now stood silent as their city drowned in gray. By midnight, the first surges of pyroclastic flow thundered down the slopes. The sound was unlike anything human ears had known. A roar of death, a storm of fire and gas moving faster than any escape. To Herculaneum, nearer the volcano, it came first, swallowing homes and people in an instant, preserving them in the embrace of molten mud. Pompeii still waited its turn, unaware of how close the end lay. The city was a place of prayers now. In temples, priests knelt before statues. In homes, families held hands, whispering the names of their gods. On rooftops, some looked to the heavens, searching for stars through the smoke. None were found. The night was absolute. And yet, there was still a strange beauty. The glow of Vesuvius lit the sky, painting it red and orange, while the falling ash shimmered in the firelight like endless snow. For those who could pause, even in terror, the sight was otherworldly, a painting alive, vast, unearthly. This was a night like no other, a night when earth and sky became one, when stone rained from the heavens, when
By the second night, Pompeii was a city in shadow, its streets nearly gone beneath the weight of ash. The air itself was thick, hot, suffocating, and every breath carried the taste of sulfur and grit. Fires burned in places where collapsing roofs had sparked embers, and the once orderly Roman town had become a maze of smoke and falling stone. Families huddled in cellars, clutching oil lamps, whispering to one another. The youngest children, too tired to cry, clung to their mothers' robes. Fathers tried to be strong, though fear hollowed their faces. Outside, the muffled sounds of collapsing walls echoed like distant drums. Each crash was another home, another memory buried forever. Some still believed escape was possible. Through the eastern gate, small groups pressed forward, climbing over heaps of pumice, dragging carts laden with belongings. Jewelry, coins, statues of gods, treasures saved from fire, but destined to vanish beneath ash. For others, escape was abandoned. They turned back to their homes, choosing to remain where they had been born, where their ancestors had lived, rather than stumble into darkness with no path clear.
The forums, once proud with marble and statues, were empty now. Stalls overturned, fountains clogged, temples silent. In the great amphitheater, the seats lay blanketed with ash, as though awaiting a performance that would never come. And still, the mountain rumbled. Each tremor shook more buildings. Each breath of wind carried more soot. Those who looked upward saw not the stars, not the moon, but only the glow of the volcano, a pillar of fire burning through the night. Lightning tangled within the column, bolts of white lashing across the black sky, illuminating Pompeii for brief moments, like ghostly snapshots. A mother holding her child, a man clutching his chest in prayer, a dog barking into the void. Pliny the Elder, on the far shore, urged his ships toward Stabii, closer to the mountain. His mission was noble, to rescue those trapped along the coast, but the air grew so thick with ash and fumes that the sails hung heavy. The sea, usually a refuge, had become treacherous, the waves wild with tremors from below. His men begged him to turn back, yet the admiral pressed on. His writings, his curiosity, his duty, all demanded that he face the fury of Vesuvius head-on. He would not return alive.
Meanwhile, inside Pompeii's villas, beauty turned to silence. Frescoes of Bacchus and Venus were veiled by gray. Marble floors vanished beneath dust. Half-eaten meals lay abandoned on bronze plates. In the Villa of the Mysteries, where walls were once alive with painted rites, the scenes of dancing women and sacred rituals grew faint, swallowed by shadow. Some houses became tombs. Archaeologists would one day find them, entire families lying together, arms outstretched, as if seeking one another in their final moments. The plaster casts show them frozen in time, a man covering his face, a woman curled around her child, a dog still chained, twisting desperately as the ash consumed it. The soundscape of the city was changing too. The cries of fear began to fade, not because fear had ended, but because voices grew hoarse, weak, or were silenced altogether. The dominant sound now was the storm of the mountain itself, the thunder of collapses, the hiss of ash, the roar of fire racing down the slopes. It was as if Pompeii had become a single vast instrument, playing a dirge composed by the earth. The first true surges arrived before dawn, pyroclastic flows of unimaginable power. Clouds of searing gas and molten rock swept down the mountainside, devouring everything in their path. They moved faster than a horse could run, faster than a man could flee. When they reached Pompeii, they struck with the force of the gods. Herculaneum to the west had already been consumed, its people entombed in a wave of burning mud that filled every chamber, preserving wooden beams, food, even papyrus scrolls. Pompeii's fate was different. It was the ash, the endless rain of it, combined with the heat of the surges that smothered the city in an embrace of stone and flame. In one home, a group sought safety in a cellar. The chamber was cool at first, sheltered from the falling debris. But as the hours passed, the air thinned, the temperature rose, and the ash crept in through cracks and gaps. Their oil lamp flickered, then died. Darkness fell, and with it, silence. At the harbor, people pressed against the shore, their faces lit by the distant fires. They watched helplessly
as the surges swept across the land, too fast to outrun, too fierce to resist. Many dropped to their knees, calling upon Neptune, upon Jupiter, upon any god who might hear. But the sea gave no reply,
the sky no mercy. And so Pompeii entered its final moments. The ash that had begun as a trickle became a flood. It buried temples and shops, markets and homes, until only rooftops remained visible. Then those too disappeared. The streets filled as though a tide of stone had swept through them, rising higher, higher, until the entire city was sealed. When the sun finally rose again, it was not upon Pompeii. The city was gone, erased from sight, hidden beneath a shroud of ash 15 feet deep. Where laughter and trade had filled the air, there was now only silence. The volcano smoldered still, but the storm was past. All that remained was gray, endless, silent gray. The world moved on. Vesuvius stood smoking, a giant at rest. Birds returned slowly, landing on mounds of ash where rooftops once stood. Grass would one day push through, reclaiming the ruins. But the people, the lives, the voices of Pompeii, they were frozen, captured in that single moment, waiting for centuries beneath the stone. It was as though time itself had chosen to hold them. When the mountain's fury at last subsided, what remained was not a city, but a grave. The storm of fire, ash, and stone had passed, leaving behind silence so complete that even the air seemed to hold its breath. The land around Vesuvius looked unrecognizable, the slopes scarred, the trees charred to blackened stumps. The shoreline altered as if reshaped by the hand of some angry god. Pompeii itself was gone. From a distance, nothing remained but a flat, gray plain where once stood bustling markets and painted villas. The proud amphitheater, the temples to Jupiter, Venus, and Apollo, the grand bathhouses and wine taverns, all were swallowed, sealed beneath an ocean of ash. To the eye of a traveler, it was as if the city had been erased from the earth, its very memory wiped clean. Survivors, scattered and dazed, stumbled into nearby towns. From Nuceria, from Stabiae, from Naples, came the first stories. A city buried alive, a mountain aflame, the sky turned to fire. Some were met with disbelief. How could a whole town vanish in a single day? Yet those who had seen the darkness firsthand spoke with eyes that carried the memory forever. Among them was Pliny the Younger, nephew to the admiral who never returned. In years to come, he would write letters describing what he saw: the trembling earth, the fleeing crowds, the sky so dark that it was impossible to tell night from day. His words would echo through time, preserving not only the facts of the eruption, but also the emotion.
For many Romans, Pompeii became a cautionary tale. The gods, they whispered, had punished the city for its indulgence, for its wealth and revelry. Had not the frescoes on its walls celebrated feasts and pleasures? Had not its amphitheater rung with the cheers of bloody games? Perhaps this was divine retribution, Jupiter's thunderbolts cast down in fiery stone. Others believed it was Fortuna's doing, the fickle goddess of fate turning her wheel without warning. But for those who had lived there, no philosophy, no story, no god could explain the loss. They had seen their loved ones vanish, their homes buried, their world transformed in the span of a single day. They carried their grief like an unseen wound.
Some settled in neighboring towns, rebuilding their lives with what little they had salvaged. Some returned to the ruins, only to find nothing. Only ash, silent and immovable. And many simply turned away, unable to face the memory of streets that no longer existed. Years passed, the scars of the eruption remained, but life returned to the region. Fields of ash gave way to soil, fertile with the minerals of the mountain. Farmers planted vineyards where Pompeii once stood, unaware that beneath their vines lay streets, houses, and temples, preserved in their final moment. Travelers walked across the land, not knowing that beneath their feet lay an entire city, frozen in time. The memory of Pompeii grew distant, then faded. Children born after the eruption heard only vague tales of a lost town. The precise location was forgotten. Only Vesuvius remained, looming silent, its peak softened by greenery, its fury resting beneath a calm facade. For centuries, the buried city lay undisturbed, its people still locked in their last desperate gestures, their belongings untouched, their lives waiting in shadow. And yet, though the world moved on, the silence of Pompeii had its own voice. On nights when the wind howled across the slopes, some claimed they could hear faint whispers, the echoes of merchants calling in the forum, of sandals on stone pavements, of laughter from taverns that had long since crumbled. Farmers spoke of dreams in which they walked streets no longer visible, guided by shadows of those who once lived there.
The land itself seemed to remember. The ash that covered Pompeii was not just a shroud. It was a seal, a guardian of memory. Within its depths, frescoes kept their colors. Loaves of bread remained intact in ovens. Jewelry lay waiting in drawers. Time, which destroys all things, had paused here, holding Pompeii in an eternal twilight, neither alive nor gone, but caught in between. The eruption of Vesuvius was not the first, nor would it be the last. Yet it was this eruption, in the year 79, that would live on in legend. A tale of nature's wrath and humanity's fragility. For the people of the empire, it was a story of awe and fear. For the land itself, it was a moment of transformation. And for us, centuries later, it would become a window into the past, a frozen world that would one day be uncovered, bringing its voices back to life. But that is not yet the story of rediscovery. For now, in this moment after the storm, Pompeii rests beneath the weight of silence. The fires are gone, the cries have faded, the gods have turned away. Only the mountain remains, its smoke thinning into the sky, its fury spent, and the city sleeps. For nearly 17 centuries, Pompeii lay hidden beneath its gray shroud. Generations rose and fell, dynasties changed, kingdoms shifted, and yet, beneath the quiet vineyards and orchards of Campania, the city slept undisturbed. Farmers plowed their fields, their plows scraping stones that once framed mosaics, never knowing the artistry concealed beneath the soil. Time, which erases so much, preserved Pompeii in its embrace. Walls held their color, the reds and golds of frescoes still vivid. Bronze lamps rested where they had last been set. Even food, bread charred in ovens, figs stored in jars, lingered in shadow, untouched. The ash had sealed away not just objects, but moments.
the very gestures of Pompeii's last breath. A mother shielding her child, a dog curled against a door, endured in silence.
Stories of the lost city never fully disappeared. Travelers whispered of an ancient place consumed by fire. Locals spoke of ruins buried near Vesuvius, but no one knew where exactly the city lay. Some believed it had sunk beneath the sea. Others thought it was no more than legend. And still, Vesuvius loomed above, its slopes softened by vineyards, as if the land itself wished to forget. It was not until the 16th century that the earth gave up its first secret. In 1599, a digger working on a water channel stumbled upon painted walls, frescoes glowing with life beneath the soil. Shocked by what he saw, he covered them again, fearful of their strangeness, or perhaps of the church's disapproval. The city remained hidden, patient in its silence. Then, in 1748, the veil was lifted. Under the Bourbon kings of Naples, excavations began. What they uncovered was astonishing. Streets paved with basalt, villas adorned with mosaics, statues of gods and emperors. Unlike Rome, whose ruins lay weathered and worn, Pompeii had been preserved in a moment of time. It was not a ruin in the usual sense. It was a frozen world. Word spread quickly. Artists, scholars, and travelers from across Europe came to see the city reborn. They walked its streets as if entering a dream, touching the doorways, stepping into homes where paintings of gods still looked down from the walls. Here was not history told in books, but life itself. The colors, the art, the laughter, the daily rhythm of a Roman town, preserved as if the people had only just stepped out. Poets were moved to write of it. Philosophers reflected on its meaning. A city buried in an instant, reminding mankind of the fragility of existence. Some visitors felt awe, others unease. To walk through Pompeii was to feel the presence of the dead, their shadows lingering in the silent rooms.
And as the centuries turned, the excavations deepened. Streets were uncovered, fountains restored, amphitheaters revealed. Entire villas appeared, filled with treasures. The Villa of the Mysteries, with its haunting frescoes of secret rites. The House of the Faun, its floors alive with mosaics. Alexander the Great locked in eternal battle. The brothels with their murals, the bakeries with their stone mills, the wine shops with their counters still intact. Pompeii was not only a discovery of beauty, it was a revelation of ordinary life. The writings on the walls, graffiti scratched by unknown hands, spoke of politics, love, jokes, and rivalries. Celadus the gladiator is the heartthrob of the girls. I am amazed, O wall, that you have not fallen, bearing the tedious scribblings of so many writers. These voices, small and human, reached across time with startling intimacy. And then there were the casts. In the 19th century, archaeologists learned to pour plaster into the voids left in the ash, the spaces once filled by bodies long gone. What emerged were forms so vivid that they stunned the world. A man crouched in prayer, a woman shielding her face, a child curled in stillness. Each figure bore witness to the final moments of Pompeii, their silence louder than any story. The rediscovery of Pompeii changed history itself. It offered not ruins, but a city in its fullness. It gave art, culture, and archaeology a new lens through which to see Rome, not as marble statues alone, but as streets filled with life, laughter, and grief. The Renaissance had looked back to classical ideals. Pompeii showed the classical reality.
Even now, centuries later, Pompeii continues to reveal itself. New excavations uncover houses once hidden, treasures long lost, secrets still buried. In 2023, archaeologists uncovered frescoes of mythological scenes so vibrant they looked freshly painted. Every stone, every mural, every relic deepens the story of a city that refused to vanish. And yet, for all its scientific importance, Pompeii is more than excavation. It is memory. It is a reminder of how suddenly life can change, how fragile even the greatest empires can be. The volcano that sleeps above it whispers a lesson, that nothing is permanent. And yet, in impermanence lies eternity. As the sun sets on the modern visitor walking its streets, the shadows of Pompeii stretch long. The paving stones glow in fading light. The broken columns stand like guardians.
And the wind drifts through empty doorways, carrying faint echoes of voices long gone. The city is gone, and yet it endures. And in this endurance lies its gift to us, the ability to walk, even briefly, in the footsteps of those who came before.
The ashes of Pompeii hold not only history, but whispers. Whispers that became stories, legends, and myths. For when a city is lost so suddenly, it does not vanish only into the earth. It also drifts into memory, into imagination, into the quiet corners of human storytelling, where truth and wonder blend. In the villages around Vesuvius, long before Pompeii was fully uncovered, people spoke of shadows that walked the hills on moonlit nights. Farmers working their vineyards told tales of strange lights, flickering among the ruins buried deep in the soil. Shepherds said that if you listened closely at night, the wind itself carried voices, the laughter of children, the clatter of markets, the cries of merchants calling their wares. Some swore that at certain hours one could hear the echo of chariot wheels rattling across invisible streets, or the muffled music of a distant feast. The mountain, too, became more than stone. Vesuvius was no longer only a volcano. It was a god, a spirit, a presence that both protected and threatened. To some, it was a divine punishment, a warning that arrogance, pleasure, and indulgence could call down fire from the heavens. To others, it was a sleeping giant, a reminder that beneath beauty always lies danger, and that life itself is lived in the space between calm and eruption. And then there were the personal stories, passed from mouth to mouth, never written, but remembered. Parents told their children of lovers separated by the eruption, whose souls still sought each other in the night air. A baker's ghost, it was said, still guarded his oven, the scent of bread drifting through the vineyards at dawn. A Roman guard, caught in duty at the gate, was believed to still stand watch, his figure glimpsed in the drifting mists when the morning light was pale. In time, poets took these fragments and wove them into verses. Musicians sang of Pompeii as a city cursed, others as a city blessed with eternal life through memory. Festivals in nearby Naples sometimes whispered of the buried city, honoring not only the gods, but the countless unknown souls who had fallen to ash. In these songs, Pompeii was not a ruin. It was a story of longing, of fragility, of the strange way life clings, even after it is gone.
Even the stones of the rediscovered city seemed touched by myth. Archaeologists walking its streets at twilight spoke of a feeling, a hush, as though they were intruders in a dream. The frescoes on the walls, painted gods, laughing dancers, solemn mysteries, did not feel entirely silent. Their eyes seemed alive,
their gestures caught in a moment that had never truly ended. Some believed that the city itself had become a spirit, that Pompeii, in being buried so suddenly, had refused to vanish. Instead, it lived on as a guardian, a reminder to those who walked its streets of both life's beauty and its fragility. To close your eyes within its ruins, some said, was to hear not silence but a heartbeat, the rhythm of thousands of lives still echoing through time. And so Pompeii entered not only the history of Rome, but the mythology of the world. Writers spoke of it as a city caught between worlds, neither alive nor dead, neither fully past nor fully present. Travelers described it as a dream turned to stone, a reminder that beneath every step we take lies another story, another life, another world forgotten by time. Tonight, as you drift deeper into this tale, imagine yourself not as a visitor, but as a dreamer, wandering Pompeii's shadowed streets. The torches flicker, the moonlight spills across broken columns. The air is thick with the scent of ash and grapevine. Somewhere in the distance, music plays, faint, almost gone, and yet it lingers, as though carried not by wind, but by memory itself. And as you walk, you realize the legends are not about fear. They are about connection. They are about how life refuses to be forgotten, about how every voice, every story, every heartbeat leaves a trace, in stone, in ash, in myth.
In the centuries after Pompeii vanished beneath the ash, storytellers kept its spirit alive through whispers that blended history with imagination. The mountain loomed always in the distance, dark, brooding, silent, and the people living in its shadow could not help but weave tales about the city it had swallowed. One of the most enduring myths spoke of a young bride who had married on the very morning of the eruption. She was said to have been preparing for her feast when the sky grew black and the mountain thundered. Her husband was swept away in the chaos, and she, unable to escape, was buried, still wearing her veil. In the villages around Naples, people said that on quiet nights, if the moon was bright and the vineyards smelled sweet, you could see her walking the hills, veil drifting like smoke, searching eternally for the husband she had lost. Some believed that couples who glimpsed her would be blessed with fidelity, as though she had gifted them the love she herself could never finish living. Another tale spoke of a child frozen forever in play. His parents had fled, but the boy lingered with his toy, unwilling to let go. When the ash fell, he was covered there in the courtyard. Farmers claimed that in the orchards, at the edge of dawn, you could hear the faint laughter of a child playing hide and seek. Some even left small toys by ruined stones, offerings for the boy whose game never ended. And then there was the baker. Archaeologists uncovered his ovens, filled with loaves turned to stone in the instant of disaster. The story grew that his spirit never left, that each morning before the sun rose, the scent of warm bread drifted faintly from the earth, carried on a breeze no one could explain. To smell it, people said, was to be reminded of the ordinary joys that make a life whole: bread, family, laughter, even in the face of sudden loss.
The myths did not only belong to individuals, they extended to the city itself. Pompeii, it was whispered, had been chosen by the gods, either cursed for indulgence or preserved for eternity. Some Roman poets imagined it as a sacrifice, an offering to the divine. Later, Christian legends suggested that it was punished for sin, the eruption sent by heaven as a warning. And yet, for every voice of judgment, there was another of compassion. Voices that said Pompeii was not destroyed, but rather transformed, carried beyond time into a state where it could never truly vanish. Festivals in the surrounding towns sometimes carried secret nods to the buried city. Bonfires were lit on certain nights not only for warmth, but as beacons for the souls still wandering. Songs were sung with verses that spoke not directly of Pompeii, but of a city asleep beneath the mountain. These songs were gentle, mournful, but also protective, as though the living had promised the dead that they would not be forgotten. And the wall paintings,
The frescoes that survived under the ash seemed themselves to breathe. The eyes of painted gods, the smiles of dancers, the swirling patterns of color, all appeared too vivid, too alive, as if they were not merely art, but a kind of doorway. To step into those houses and look upon those walls was to feel a presence, as though the city had captured its own spirit before the fire fell, sealing its memory inside the paint. The myths grew not only from grief, but from wonder. For in Pompeii, time had been trapped. Life had been caught mid-step, mid-breath, mid-laughter. To those who uncovered it centuries later, it felt less like a ruin and more like a dream paused, waiting. And so people said that Pompeii had not ended at all. It had only gone to sleep. And if you walked softly among its streets at dusk, they said, you could almost hear it breathing.
As centuries slipped quietly by, Pompeii was remembered not only in whispers, but in the living rhythm of festivals and the songs of the people. In villages along the Bay of Naples, where fishing boats rocked gently and vineyards ripened in the sun, stories of the buried city were woven into traditions that outlived empires. On long summer nights, bonfires flickered in the hills, flames rose into the dark, echoing the memory of fire once poured from the mountain. Children would dance around the blaze while elders murmured old tales of the city that vanished in a single day. They said the fire honored those who had been taken, keeping their spirits warm through endless sleep. Some villagers believed that if you stared long enough into the flames, you might glimpse shadowy figures, not frightening, but familiar. Families holding hands, bakers kneading dough, couples walking arm in arm, ordinary lives forever etched into the smoke. Songs, too, carried the memory. Fishermen sang of a city of silence as they cast their nets at dawn. Women sang lullabies that spoke of the sleeping houses beneath the mountain, rocking their children gently into dreams. These melodies lingered like mist, passed from generation to generation until the origins blurred and only the feeling remained, soft, mournful, yet strangely comforting. There were omens as well, mystical signs believed to tie the living to the buried. Farmers told of vineyards that grew sweeter grapes near ancient stones, as if the earth itself had absorbed Pompeii's joys. Shepherds spoke of flocks refusing to graze in certain fields at night, turning their eyes toward the mountain as though they saw something invisible. Travelers wrote of sudden silences on the road, birds pausing, breezes stopping, as if the world itself held its breath in memory of the city.
And then there were the frescoes. When archaeologists uncovered Pompeii's painted walls centuries later, the colors were so vibrant, the figures so alive, that many swore they were more than art. To gaze at them too long, some believed, was to fall under their spell. The painted dancers seemed to sway with the light. The gods seemed to watch you back, their eyes filled with secrets of a world lost and preserved. In dim lamplight, the walls whispered of laughter, feasts, and prayers frozen in time. For many, stepping into those houses was like stepping into the very heartbeat of the past. Legends told that Pompeii's spirits were not sorrowful, but watchful. They guarded the land, blessing it with fertile soil, rich harvests, and bountiful seas. To honor them, locals left offerings at shrines: a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, a garland of flowers. These gestures were small, but filled with reverence. In return, it was said, the spirits kept storms gentle and vines heavy with fruit. Over time, these myths gave Pompeii a second life, not as a ruined city, but as a living presence in the hearts of those nearby. It became a story shared around tables, a warning whispered in storms, a comfort sung into cradles. The city was not forgotten,
because it had never truly left. And as centuries turned into millennia, Pompeii remained both real and unreal, a place of stone and ash, but also of memory and myth, a city buried yet breathing in dreams.
Time has a way of softening even the strongest walls. For centuries, dynasties rose and fell like the tides of a vast sea. Emperors who once commanded legions of builders were gone, their voices reduced to faint echoes in forgotten halls. The wall, however, remained. Mile after mile of stone and earth, stretched across mountains and valleys. Its towers standing like weary sentinels, watching as the ages slipped by. Once, soldiers had patrolled those battlements, armor glinting in the sun, horns calling across the wind. Now the watchtowers stood empty. The pathways grew quiet, and the drums of war no longer thundered. Grass began to weave its way through the cracks. Wildflowers blossomed in courtyards where banners once flew. The cries of owls replaced the march of armies. In this long silence, nature became the wall's companion. The seasons moved gently over its stones. Winter snow blanketing its ridges like soft quilts. Spring rains trickling down its steps. Summer heat warming the earth beneath. Autumn winds scattering golden leaves across its path. The wall breathed in rhythm with the land. No longer a barrier of war, but a quiet part of the landscape. Travelers still came. Poets walked its length and wrote of its vastness, their words turning stone into dream. They described it as a dragon uncoiled, resting upon the mountains, its scales glinting in the moonlight. Painters captured its towers beneath skies filled with stars. Wanderers stood upon its heights and felt the hush of eternity stretch before them. There were broken places too. Stones crumbled, gates lost to time. Yet even in ruin, the wall carried dignity. Birds nested in its cracks. Vines curled along its sides, and the wind itself sang through its hollows. What had once been built Night, under the gaze of the moon, the wall seemed to dissolve into silence. The battlements cast long shadows, soft and haunting. The mountain air turned cool, carrying the scent of pine, the whisper of streams. A stillness fell over everything, not empty, but full, like the breath before sleep.
And so the wall endured, not through battles, not through emperors, but through quiet, through the simple passage of time. Time has always been the greatest builder and the quietest destroyer. The Great Wall of China, born of human hands, stone by stone, carried within its length the pulse of dynasties. It had once echoed with commands, the clatter of hooves, the clash of iron, and the urgent footsteps of watchmen. But now, the clamor of centuries had quieted, leaving only the hush of wind. The Ming Dynasty, the last great age of the wall's construction, had passed. The soldiers who once stood guard upon its ridges had long since been replaced by silence. Their camps had faded back into earth. Their banners, once sharp against the sky, had turned to dust. The wall remained, but its purpose had shifted. It was no longer the edge of empire, no longer the teeth of defense against invading armies. Instead, it became something else, a witness, a memory, a patient spine of stone stretching into eternity. The battlements, those jagged crowns of brick, stood like weary guardians. Some were broken, their towers hollow, their steps crumbled. Others still rose proudly, though worn by centuries of rain and sun. If you walked along the wall in this time, you would feel not the urgency of defense, but the calm breath of history itself. The stones no longer bristled with soldiers. They whispered with the rustle of leaves, the cry of distant cranes, the hum of cicadas in summer. Nature had returned.
In spring, wild flowers spread their colors along the wall's ridges. Yellow blossoms sprouted between stones, purple petals softened the sharpness of the towers. Green moss grew like a velvet cloak, blurring the edges of brick and earth. Birds nested in crevices where once arrows had been loosed. The wall, once a blade, became a garden. In summer, the sun poured down, turning the stones warm beneath bare feet. The air shimmered with heat, and grasses swayed gently in the wind. Farmers from nearby villages brought their goats to graze along the shadow of the wall. Children climbed its lower sections, their laughter echoing faintly against the stones that had once heard the cries of battle. Life continued, softer now, no longer under the weight of imperial command, but under the rhythm of seasons. Autumn turned the mountains gold. The forests along the wall blazed with color. Red leaves, amber light, drifting breezes. The towers stood among this fire of leaves like silent monks, unmoving, watching. At dusk, when the sky burned orange and purple, the wall seemed endless, an unbroken horizon of history dissolving into the setting sun. Travelers who walked there wrote of the strange feeling it gave, not fear, not sorrow, but awe, as though they were standing between two eternities, the past and the present. And then winter came. Snow fell quietly, covering the battlements, smoothing every jagged stone into soft curves. Icicles hung from towers. The wall seemed to disappear beneath white blankets, visible only as a faint, sinuous line across the mountains. No footsteps disturbed it. No horns blew, only the whisper of wind and the occasional call of a raven. The wall, which had been made by so many hands, now belonged to no one. It belonged to time. Centuries passed this way. Dynasties fell. Kingdoms rose elsewhere. The world changed, but the wall remained.
not untouched. No, it was scarred and broken, its stones cracked, its bricks stolen by villagers for homes, its watchtowers hollow. Yet, even in ruin, it breathed dignity. The wall did not resist the centuries. It accepted them, wore them like a cloak. The more it crumbled, the more it seemed to merge with the land, as though it had always been part of the mountains, a ridge among ridges, a vein of earth hardened into memory.
Poets wandered its length. They wrote verses about its vastness, about its silence. One described it as a dragon sleeping upon the mountains, its scales broken, but its spirit unbroken. Another wrote of the loneliness of walking along it at night, under the moon, when the only sound was the crunch of their own footsteps and the sigh of the wind. To these travelers, the wall was no longer a weapon of stone. It was a mirror of the human spirit, enduring, scarred, quiet, eternal. And there were villagers who lived in its shadow, for whom the wall was not a monument, but a neighbor. They told stories of ghosts that lingered along its towers, spirits of workers who had died building it, whose bones had been swallowed by the earth beneath its foundations. Some said on windy nights you could hear their voices carried through the gaps in the stones, not cries of pain, but low murmurs, as if the wall itself was speaking in dreams. Children grew up with these tales, both afraid and comforted by them. For the wall was always there, a constant presence, unchanging as generations passed. Sometimes, travelers came not for poetry or legend, but for quiet. They walked its length, step by step, until the world of villages and cities fell away. The further they went, the quieter it became, until all that remained was stone, sky, and breath. Some said that standing upon the wall at dawn, with mist rolling over the mountains, was like standing between heaven and earth. Others spoke of sunsets when the wall stretched endlessly into the glow, its towers fading into gold and shadow, like a pathway into eternity itself. Even broken, the wall inspired awe, perhaps more so in its ruin than in its power. For in ruin, it was gentler. In ruin, it belonged to everyone, to the birds, to the grass, to the wanderers who found in its silence a kind of peace. At night, the stillness deepened. The moon would rise, pale and watchful, casting silver light across the stones. The wall would glow faintly, like a ribbon of light stitched into the mountains. No armies moved, no fires burned in the towers, only the stars above, vast and uncountable, and the quiet breath of wind along the ridges. The wall had lost its voice of command, its drums of war, its cries of defense. But in their place, it had found another voice, silence. Not empty silence, but full silence. The kind that carries weight, that soothes, that holds. The silence of something that has endured, that has seen too much to speak loudly anymore. And so, the Great Wall continued into this long silence. Mile after mile, century after century, it endured. Not because it was guarded, not because it was needed, but because it had become one with time. Its stones no longer bristled with fear or power. They carried only peace.
There are stories that end with fire, and there are stories that end with silence. The story of the Great Wall ends with both. It was fire when it was built. The fire of ambition, of fear, of empire. It was silence when it endured. Silence of centuries, of wind, of time. And now, as we come to rest at the close of this journey, the wall becomes something more. It becomes eternal. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. Imagine standing before the wall one last time. The air is still. The mountains rise around you. The wall stretches beyond sight, fading into mist, into cloud, into memory. It is dusk. The sun is setting. The sky is painted in soft hues of rose and gold. Shadows lengthen across the stones. The towers are silhouettes against the fading light. You place a hand on the cool brick, and you feel not stone, but centuries. Not walls, but voices. Not emptiness, but the weight of countless lives. You breathe in slowly. You breathe out slowly. And the wall breathes with you. In your mind, the wall becomes more than a monument. It becomes a river of memory, carrying with it the labor of workers, the ambition of emperors, the courage of soldiers, the tears of families. All of it flowing together, becoming something larger than history, becoming timelessness. Step by step, you walk along its spine. Your footsteps are quiet. The world around you begins to blur. The trees sway in rhythm with your breath. The mountains fold gently into the sky. You hear no noise, no clamor, only the low hum of eternity, like the earth itself is whispering.
The wall is no longer defense. The wall is no longer burden. The wall is no longer empire. The wall is a lullaby. Stone by stone, tower by tower, it hums softly beneath your thoughts. It cradles you in its vastness. It carries you along its endless length, guiding you not to war but to peace, not to vigilance but to rest. As you continue, the night deepens. Stars begin to appear one by one, tiny lanterns in the great dome above. The moon rises, casting silver light across the mountains. The wall glows softly, like a ribbon of quiet woven between heaven and earth. You stop walking, you sit, you rest. The stones beneath you are cool. The air is gentle. The silence is absolute, and yet it is full. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the wall speaking, not in words, not in sentences, but in a rhythm, in a pulse, in a slow, steady cadence that matches your breath. Inhale, exhale. The wall breathes with you. Your eyelids grow heavy. The world softens. The stories of soldiers, of emperors, of builders fade. What remains is calm. The wall stretches endlessly, but you no longer need to follow. You need only to rest. You need only to let the wall carry the weight. It has carried it for centuries. It will carry it for centuries more. You are safe here. You are held here. You are home here. As the stars multiply above, the wall dissolves into dream. The mountains melt into darkness. The sky becomes a vast cradle, and you drift. The wall becomes sleep. The silence becomes peace, and the story becomes eternal. So rest now. Let go. Breathe gently. Close your eyes. The wall will stand. The night will hold you. The earth will sing you to sleep. And in this endless silence,
you are finally free. The wall is no longer a monument to guard or to fear. It is only stone. It is only silence. It is only peace. As you drift now into dreams, may the quiet strength of the wall carry you deeper, into soft sleep, into gentle rest, into the calm of eternity. Good night.